KPIs, prepared for and presented at the 2017 Square One Entrepreneurship Training Program. Square One is a program of the Center for Emerging Technologies. CET is an affiliate of the Cortex Innovation Community. Square One is funded in part by the Missouri Technology Corporation.
For this stage company, when you're just getting started, a part-time CFO is really a smart way to go, because you get the experience of someone like me or Michelle for the hard things and the things that are going to trip you up, but you don't have to pay a full-time CFO. Because when I was full-time CFO, I ended up doing everything from HR to loading the refrigerator up, I mean, I did everything from, whatever it wasn't engineering or sales, and even got involved in sales, really. So if it was engineering is the only thing I really never learned how to do. I did learn a lot about sales, and just, so I have a very broad experience. But I think at this stage, when you're just getting started, there's lots of resources like me in the community, so find someone that you want to work with and spend that money just to save yourself down the road. Because there are a few things that if you don't do them right from the beginning, it can really bite you down the road. And those are cap table management. Make sure that you have a lawyer involved whenever you're selling a security, that you have a cap table every step of the way. Every time you issue an option grant, every time you talk to anybody about giving them some kind of equity, unless it gets documented, unless it's on that cap table, it doesn't exist, right? So you just have to really make sure that you really baby that cap table, and you know it back and forth, or somebody in your organization takes ownership of that thing. There's lots of great programs out there. One of them is called eShares. I just implemented it for one of my clients. And also, in addition to giving you the software, they give you as many valuations as you want. So they'll do that valuation process for you as part of their fee. And it's just, if you have only a small number of investors, it's only like $3,000 a year. So it's money very well spent to have that all online. You can do all your transactions through there. They become your transfer agent, so you don't have to pay a lawyer as much, because you can issue all the stock from there once you have the lawyer do one set of documents. Otherwise, you pay a lawyer to hold all those documents for you and be the keeper of those documents. Somebody third party, because an investor, when they come in, they're not going to want to see what your records are. They're going to want to see what the lawyer's records are, and they're going to trust those over what. And that's in the transaction. One of the companies I worked with in the last couple of years just got sold to Cisco. We spent more time working on cap table issues, what shares, who owned them, how they got them, than any other thing except for the IP. So that an investor or a buyer is going to care about how you treated your employees, what you gave them in equity, who owns what, how did that happen, and then what is your IP situation going to be like. Other than that, your sales and if you have customers, those kinds of things are important too. But those are the key things that you need somebody like Michelle or me. So just make sure that you really understand that part of your business. That's just my advice. Having been through it from beginning till end and learned a lot through the sales process at Cisco, I want to do many of those. I want to do a lot of those for St. Louis companies, to be able to be there when we're exiting. It's awesome. But I want to make sure that I work with the ones up front so that I can make sure that we're ready to be sold. We're going to build this company to sell it. Even if you want to operate the rest of your life, I think you still should build it so that you're ready to sell it when that time comes. So that's just my soapbox. So when we get into KPIs, then when we're talking about when Michelle was talking about building your model, your financial model, at the beginning, you're using KPIs, your key performance indicators, to kind of help you build that model. Anything that you would most like to track as you grow is what your KPIs are. Like, how many customers do I have? If you're a lot of the web guys, or how many eyeballs do I have? How many users, or whatever that measure is that's going to put the value on your company. Those are the key things you want to understand at the beginning, and then you track them as you go along to see if we're climbing that mountain. Are we climbing in our KPIs always want to go up and to the right, just like your numbers, right? So you want to always have whatever you're tracking, how do you get from here where you have no customers, no revenue, to where you're really going to have the numbers that are attractive to your investors. And if you tell your investors, I'm going to get to this this key indicator by the money that you give me, you need to track along the way so that when you go back to them and you say, okay, well, I told you I'd get to, $10 or $1 million in revenue with the $2 million that you gave me, but I only got to 500, and here's why. Here's the problems we ran into. We didn't get as many customers, or the revenue wasn't as much as we thought, or the opposite. We got doubled what we thought we would do because we ran into a situation where a customer just bought way more. One of the companies I'm working with, they started out with a small, they had a software product that they sold on a per seat basis, and then it went to one of their, so they were selling their sales metrics were they might sell a $2,000 a year license on a per seat. So a big company, 5 seats, $10,000. Where one of those $10,000 customers went and took that product and used it at Exxon. And Exxon said, oh, gee, I kind of like that. What is that? And then they went from selling $10,000 seats to $500,000. So that's the kind of thing that can change your business overnight. So what are those key metrics? How do we affect them? How do we make them, how do we go from that $10,000 customer to $500,000? And then another customer I'm working with, they started at $200,000 customers. They went after the big guys because the CEO has a relationship with Disney, and he has this great pedigree, and he was able to get large customers. But then once you run out of your Rolodex, what do? So now we're going after the small guys. We form partnerships with Salesforce and with Zendesk and some other people, and we're going to go from these big customers down to selling 2 or 3 seats. How do you do that? How does your business change if you have to pivot from a large to a small? And can you do that without cannibalizing the big business? So those KPIs are important to understand where you are and then where do you need to go. So that's kind of the main drivers of why we care about them. So if you look academically at key performance indicators, they're really just ways of measuring your success. And so there's ways that they can be quantitative, things like that you would present in numbers, like I have 100 customers, and I have 100 customers who are paying on average $4,000 a year, so I have $400,000 in revenue. So those are kind of, you want to be able to talk really, you want to know your KPIs backwards and forwards. I'm in a sales process right now with one of my customers that's a telemedicine customer. And so, every time we talk to a potential buyer, they're going to ask the same questions. How many customers do you have? What's your average revenue? How long is your sales cycle? Anything like that you can quantify, they're going to want to know, and you better have that on the tip of your tongue as you're talking to people. And if you're using that in your projections, say, how do you gain credibility with your projections? You want to be able to really feel confident in those numbers, and when you build up your projections, anytime you feel like going, ooh, that's the stretch, how do I get 100 customers? How do I get the next 100? How do I get, how you got to have the story kind of stick together, right? And so when you're looking at your projections, you also want to feel like you're going to be confident talking about them, and that they're somewhat believable to yourself, and then if you believe in them, then your investor will believe in them. The qualitative that can't be presented, one of the challenges for a lot of companies is when you're out selling is how do you prove someone their ROI, their return on investment, when there's not a real hard way for you to say, if you spend $5,000 on this a month, you'll save $10,000. So you're going to save that much by coming in. And sometimes you don't have quantitative numbers to say that, but then you might go through an example of how do I justify that from another way of coming at it, that customer will, with our telemedicine company, we talk about keeping that person in their bed instead of treating someone who is like come up to the hospital, like my poor husband over there in the sling. That if he had to go back to the hospital, that's very costly to the facility. They lose that customer. So there's things that are quantitative, and then there's things that are qualitative. The family is going to feel so much better if you can keep them there than take them to the hospital. And so you sell it to the nursing facility as a way to improve their care. And those are more qualitative than quantitative. So, things like that may fall into how you talk about your product, why somebody would buy your product rather than another one. With leading indicators, that's when we're going to get into things that when you're talking about sales cycle. So one of the things that when we're talking with an investor or a purchaser of the company, they want to know what's your sales cycle, and if they can predict, if my sales cycle when I first started was 12 months, it took me, if once I first talked to a customer and gave them a demo, and then it was a year before they would buy, and then this year I've reduced that sales cycle to 6 months. What improvement did that do to my business? If I can close a customer today that I have in my pipeline 6 months from now, hopefully my trajectory is going. So those are kind of leading indicators, things that you're improving in the business. So if you want to talk to your customer about a sales cycle that is improving, or your revenue that per customer is improving, just things that help to predict the future are kind of called the leading indicators that you want to think about how those would impact your business. And then if you don't make it, why? My revenue per customer wasn't what I hoped it would be, or my sales cycles were, even though I hoped that I could close somebody. If you talk to salespeople, they got this. It's the end of the third quarter, and I only have half my budget done for the year, but I'm going to get the next half in 6 months, or through the rest of the year. So anyway, there's lots of different ways that you can think about how to manage your business, and that's just what the KPIs are designed to do, is to think about from your own business perspective, what are the really key drivers, revenue drivers, cost drivers, things like that can help you to feel confident about your business and explaining it to somebody. So when I'm working with a customer, a lot of times I come in and they don't really have these key performance at all. They may know how much they've sold that year, but they don't have it to the level of talking about it in a quantitative way. So we talk about, this is kind of looking at it from a software point of view again. So that's what a lot of my experience is right now. I want to look at contract. There's different ways of talking about the same thing. Sometimes you get in the difference between revenue, an accounting point of view, and a sales point of view. So in contracts, as an example of that, with software, you might sign an annual contract and get paid in March for a whole year. So if that contract is $12,000, I get a $12,000 contract. But I get to the end of the year and I only have $10,000 in revenue because I have 2 months that I didn't get to recognize yet, because I have to perform that service over 12 months. So it's understanding that kind of level of understanding is what an investor wants to make sure that you understand the accounting side of the world, and the cost side or the revenue side of the world might be different. So then we talk about monthly recurring revenue. In software, that's a big deal because that's a leading indicator of my future success. If I'm continually growing my monthly recurring revenue is, month after month, I'm going to recognize that much revenue. And then your cash flow might be different than that because it depends on when you get paid. So you have to understand both the accounting side of your performance indicator and sort of the cash flow side, which is they may be different. A big number in software, again, is annual recurring revenue. That's the main way of valuing software companies. Depending on your growth trajectory, you can get paid anywhere from 1 times revenue to 20 times revenue. It just really varies, but that annual recurring revenue is just like the key metric that a software company would be judged by. That monthly recurring revenue, and then translating that to annual. That's usually how, when you're looking at an acquisition, that's how the investor is going to think about it. So when you're talking with an investor, or for how somebody who's going to buy you would think about, is your annual recurring revenue.
Can I ask a really tactical question? If you negotiate a deal for an annual contract, but it's March, do you prorate that deal to start in March and then, or do you do March to March?
Usually it's March to March.
Okay.
So anytime I'm selling the first contract, I want to get at least a year.
Okay.
And usually I try to get 2 or 3. Just because that's another thing that an investor will look at, is how many years are these people under contract for. Not to say that people don't break software contracts, or you might, any kind of recurring revenue contract, people will find ways to break it. But if you do provide a good service, and so that's a key measure of how long are the people under contract. So get as long a contract as you can. If you sell twice, you might sell them in March and then sell them in September. And then you might say, well, we'll give you a 6-month contract, so you co-terminate. And then the next contract, the whole thing will review again in March. So then you actually get, you get a whole year in March for the second contract. So that's another way of looking at that. Then your revenue per customer is always a key indicator, and something that you're going to want to make sure is reasonable in your projections. So these things both are used in projections and in use reporting to your board and to your investors, and when someone's looking at buying you. That's a very key thing. And is it going up or down? If it's going down, then why? You have to be able to explain that. I went from selling large customers in my Rolodex to now I've got this product. I came out with a freemium version, and all of a sudden I have a very low cost per customer, but I've got way many more customers. So you might, in that case, segment that revenue into the large and small, and that's what I did for them, is look at the small customers versus large, and how is each one growing independently. So if you have some kind of pivot like that, you want to make sure that you have metrics to show the different products differently, so that you can explain it without getting into the weeds. So these key performance indicators really are a way of being able to have someone kind of wrap their head around your business very quickly at a high level, and understand the basics of it without you having to go into all the weeds of the technology and all that. You want to sell the business, not the technology. Another one is lifetime value and churn. Those kind of are two sides of the coin. With a software business, if you can minimize churn, which means your customer's leaving you, then that's value into the future. That's a leading indicator of how much of that revenue, if I have an annual recurring revenue of $100,000 a year, am I going to have that next year? Is it really going to recur or not? And usually when you're modeling software revenue, you have to assume some level of churn, or they won't believe you. So that's kind of one of those believability factors. Do you know your business? Do you understand the financial side of things? If you went in and said, I'm never going to lose a customer, then that will be a blow to your credibility. So 2% standard industry, just get a standard in this 2% a month is very 1%, it just depends on the industry and how much that is. But when you have those big customers, then that's the downside of having a big customer. You lose one customer and your churn number can really get blown out of the water. So churn is just, what are you losing? So you start with your beginning, you add your new, subtract your churn, and that you do that every month in your reporting and in the way you're forecasting it. And lifetime value is just, how long are you assuming in your model? Lifetime value is really a modeling technique, is that, I assume once I get a customer, I'm going to have them for 3 years. That's another industry kind of standard. So, if you're selling, is your even one of the things to ask yourself as you're modeling is, do I have a repeatable business? And investors really like repeatable businesses. So if you can figure out a way to get that repeat customer or sell something like that, then that's at least that in the industries I work with. So then in getting into, beyond the financial, we also look at a lot of the metrics we work with for managing is the marketing metrics and just how is your sales building. So this is when you actually get into operations and you're having a sales process. There's lots of tools out there now to help you with these marketing leads. A lot of web-based marketing is a big, huge money sink. You have a lot of investment sometimes in that part of your business. Marketing dollars are one of those things that's really hard to create an ROI for. I've never really asked for my people to present that to me because they can't. It's really hard. It's kind of just an experiential thing. You just learn, try to have a tools that will help you, something like a HubSpot, or there's tons and tons of, every client I work with uses something different for this, so that'll just show you there's just all kinds of different ways to approach this and different levels of sophistication. Maybe just something like I don't know, there's all kinds of different ways to get into, but if you are going to use a marketing tool, track what's happening with it and make sure that you understand it at least enough to get the value out of the metrics that it's producing for you. So some of the things there is marketing qualified leads. How do you use your sales force or whatever your marketing or your CRM system is, how do you move from somebody who's interested, or you might have given a demo to someone you're contracting with, to someone you're negotiating with, to someone who's going to buy. All those different things in the sales funnel become KPIs as you build your business too. So you want to make sure that not only on the financial side, but marketing people in almost every aspect of your business, you can create KPIs for your team to come and report on and make sure that everybody's kind of moving up that mountain with you. So that's another way of looking at what's happening in our sales. We look at, does a trial convert to, if you're giving free trials, that's another slippery slope too. Is that a sales inoculation, or is it really good? It just depends on how developed your product is sometimes. Are you ready to give trials or not? Do you need more friendly customers who are going to give you that customer feedback? So you want to look at things like that. Conversion rates, do they become customers? Or from the sales leads, how many of them become customers? What's your pipeline look like? That's an often asked question, especially in a acquisition situation or in a end of the quarter situation. Are we going to make, what's your pipeline look like? Are you going to make your number or not? So the CEO wants to get a handle on that. So the sales guys need to start being able to report in a systematic way as you grow, what's your pipeline look like? How are you tracking that? There's lots of tools available for that, for the CRM tools, Salesforce, HubSpot. There's just a ton of those as well. So what are you going to be using to create the data to make sure that you understand all these things? So you have to create the data before you can produce your KPIs. So pipeline is a key. An acquisition target, if someone's coming in to acquire you, they want to know, how much business do you have? And then they're going to add their sales force behind it to grow it that much faster. Month over month growth. When we were working on this sale to Cisco, the CEO is going to live or die by 25% a quarter growth. 25%, it has to be 25%. I'm like, it's not, you have to push your teams to get to the metrics that you want sometimes. And if you have a target, at least people know what they're reaching for. And if they can make it or not make it, and they need to so that helps the team kind of understand the goals too, as to, what do we have to do to get the metrics that we need to either raise the next round or, be able to be acquired for the price that we want to be. So that's a huge one for software companies anyway, but any company, growth will project, it's a leading indicator of what we might be able to do in the future. One of the other things that's interesting me about a renewal business like I work with in software companies is how well do we know our customers? And do we know when someone's going to churn? And if we don't know and they churn and it's a surprise to us, then we have to start looking at what are the key metrics that would help us identify a customer who's not happy. Is it, calls into customer service? Is it the trouble tickets? Is it, what is it in our business usage statistics if you're a software company and you're selling a product that the customer uses in their business? Can we understand how frequently they're logging in and using the software? What are they doing with it? How often are they on the system? How long are they on the system? How many customers are they interacting? So those kind of usage statistics can also be very helpful in managing your business and understanding the future. If you're going to, looking backwards, you can a lot of times tell when we go back and look at a customer and they weren't using the software, then we kind of know, we should have known that something was up. So those kind of things. What's our renewal rate? When you're doing your projections, you're going to project a renewal rate. So that's another thing you want to track and make sure that you're on track for what you might have projected for renewal rates. If there's cancellations, do we understand why? It's a big part of what we're explaining. For one of the customers I'm working with, we're being sold, and the buyers want to know, for every customer we've ever lost, why? Why did they, and because they only had 60 customers, so and when you lose 2 or 3 of them, they want to understand exactly why did they leave, and then so you have to understand those things, track them, make sure that you can explain this. In a lot of cases, it was because the client got acquired by somebody and the new owner didn't see the value in it. And sometimes that happens in an acquisition situation. They have a different financial model, they have their own solution. There's a million different reasons why someone might cancel, and particularly in an acquisition kind of situation like that. So those are kind of more, not so much number driven or not economic driven, but just it does affect the economics when you look at the things that are important to you. When you look at more, hard-nosed financial things, the burn rate is always a question I get asked by my management teams, by investors, by, how much cash are we burning every month? Because what they're really asking is, how long are you going to live before you either need to raise money, or you need to get more customers, or you need to sell this company before you don't have anything left. So, one of the key things that as I was operating as a full-time, I spent most of my time worrying about when we're this company to run out of cash. That was just the nature of the beast that you're working with when you're in a startup company and raising money, because you don't want to raise too much because your valuation is never what you hope it will be. And then you want to make sure that that cash lasts as long as possible so that you can get further down the road, you can get more customers, you can get further in your technology. Whatever it is your goals are, how long is that cash going to last? So the trick about financials is sometimes when you look at just the financials, you're not understanding actual cash, because us accountants like to mess with cash and look at, spreading like revenue over a period of time. So you can't look at your financial statements and know your cash burn. You have to look at your cash flow. And I get to the point where when I'm really managing cash to the month, like I do a lot of times, I'll go to my bank statement and I'll look at a month's activity and say, what did I spend money on? And kind of categorize it and understand, okay, this is what this month was, this is the last 6 months history, what is my next 6 months? Just really understand your cash flow down to, the category. And in software, it's mostly headcount, right? So it's pretty easy to project headcount because that doesn't change month to month unless you're doing contract labor. But, what are the key drivers of your cash burn? Understand those. If you're 80% of your costs are headcount, then you better understand your headcount. So how many months do I get? Revenue is just, revenue is a key driver. Growth rates, your market share, probably at this stage of the game, no one's going to have enough market share to really count in the industry. But another big driver when someone's coming in to acquire you is your margin. So, there's only really 2 things you need to do in the startup world. You need to have a product somebody wants to buy, and you have to be able to make money doing it, right? So if you can never show a margin, then, why are you here, right? So, at some point in time, sometimes you need to get to volume to be able to get a decent margin. You can't maybe start day one with the margins that you're hoping for, but You have to, at some point in time, get your cost of goods sold to a point where you're actually going to make money. Where is that break-even point? Where is profitability for this company? So, and a lot of that is driven by margin, typically, except for in software, again, where you really don't have a cost of goods sold because all your cost is already washed away from people cost. And once you've developed the software, you can sell as many times as you want. It doesn't really cost you anything more. But if you have a product like the telemedicine company, their cost is the doctors who actually are sitting on the other side of the screen giving the care to the people. Those guys cost us money month in, month out. What's our margin is a big, big question in this acquisition scenario is, how much do those doctors cost versus how much revenue do we make? And that is, you just have to make sure you understand those factors and make sure where do I make the money and what is that money that I'm making on that. When do I get to break even? I mean, that's another big question for an investor is when do I have to stop funding you? So everybody at some point in time wants to be able to stop the burn, get to cash flow break even, and then get to where you're profitable and that you don't have to raise any more cash, and because every time you raise cash, you're diluting yourself. And then the other key thing that we work on when we're developing a company is the product itself. When is the product going to be ready? When am I going to be able to start selling? Do we have a pipeline of products? Is there a minimally viable product? What does it take to get to that where I can actually start getting customer feedback? So we look at our milestones, when we're going to have different things, and do we achieve them? And keeping an engineering team to its milestones is a really key challenge. So you got to keep reminding people, you promised me this, why aren't we there? So that gives the CEO a way to go back and say, where are these milestones you promised me? Keep people honest, keep people working hard to achieve those milestones. That might be the only, kind of the way that people that in this world like to work is achieving something and then achieving the next thing. Kind of that sprint mentality that a lot of the developers have is let's get this done, let's get a piece of it done, and then move on to the next piece. So what are those milestones? How do you ferret them out and then keep people to them? It's a management tool that you can use. Your roadmap, minimally viable product, that's a really key issue is, when can you start getting this in front of a customer? I mean, customer feedback is like the number one thing, especially in any kind of product you're getting. How well will it be received? My husband can attest to this one. We had one of the companies I went to work for, they developed 3D technology that was going to create a face on a doll, and it was a phenomenal flop. And it was $20 million down the drain for the company. I stayed, that was my shortest job ever. I stayed like 4 weeks. And I got there, and the $20 million was gone. Product wasn't quite ready yet. And they had a stack of bills, and I was the first person to say, excuse me, but there's no money left. But it was Christmas time, so they were going to market, because that market was going to prove that this product was going to sell like hotcakes. And they got out there and hadn't done their homework and tested the product, and the product was not well received, let's just say. So Rich and I have one of ourselves. And that's about the only people who do. There's maybe about a dozen of us who have the product, except for there's like 10,000 in a warehouse somewhere.
It creates a doll face on what?
A doll, like a Barbie doll size thing.
Scan of your face and put it on the doll.
It was terrifying. Yeah. Yes. Your company to sell. I said at the beginning that when I'm working with a company, I want to make sure that at any point in time they're in a position to be sold. And the reason I think that way about what I'm doing is that I'm the one capturing the data room for how I'm going to present this to a buyer. Or, I mean, in this case, your buyer might be the next investor, right? So every time you go, you raise money once, you may not, like I said, you may not want to raise. If you think over the life of this company, you're going to raise $5 million. I want to raise $1 million to start, prove my technology, increase my value, and then go raise the next 3 to 5. And so that's really selling your company, even though it's just another investment. It's the same, it's almost the same process. I would say that an investor, depending on how their sophistication is, they're going to go through a lot of the same due diligence that a buyer would go through. A buyer like Cisco will go so deep and so hard that you're just like, your mind will be blown. You're like, no way, you can't ask me for that many things. But, and so an investor probably won't go that deep, but if they were smart, they would. They would go not quite as deep, but a lot into every contract that you have with a customer, every contract that you have with an employee, every option agreement, every contract you have with a vendor. That should all be somewhere that when that investor calls and says, I want to look at your due diligence file, I can go, here's a link to it. And that's all I have to do. I shouldn't spend 2 weeks scrambling to get those documents together. They should be somewhere that I can provide a link. And it will have my cap table, it will have my financial history, it will have my projections, it will have every document that I feel like is necessary for an investor to view. And if you're doing that, then when you're ready to raise money or ready to sell, it'll all be there, and you won't have to scramble, and you won't have to, I think that in the case that there's some of them, when I come in, if I had a buyer, they would walk away before they got into the detail, because they would say, this isn't what I thought it was. So get your ducks in a row from the beginning, and it's accounting and finance stuff is so much easier if you do it right up front, instead of having someone come in and try to follow you. All you do is hire a bookkeeper, do that. Just hire Michelle to do bookkeeping, because that will be, then rather than do it yourself, because there's just some things that if you're not an accountant, it's just some things that people just get confused about, and then it's so hard to unwind and do it right. It's so much easier to do it up front. It's so much less expensive. The other thing I'd say is hire somebody like Experian or ADP Source or somebody to do your HR. Just don't try to do it yourself, because you will spend so much more on the back end than you would just saying, I'm not an HR expert, I don't need that full-time in my shop, I'm just going to outsource that. Outsource everything you possibly can, I think. That's my experience after having done this for 20 years, is if I didn't have to hire an HR person, I can put that $80,000, $90,000 off for forever. The company that just got sold to Cisco, they used Insperity, and it was the best decision, one of the best decisions they made for their HR operations. They had everything, they took care of every liability. Cisco didn't ask us a question about any of that stuff, so there's certain things that if you don't do them right, you can really create some liability for yourself. And so if someone's an expert at that, it's just worth it to do that right from the beginning. All those I-9 things and having all the documentation, every raise is documented, everything that you would ever do with somebody, especially if your asset is your people. Like that's what Cisco bought. They bought the people, and the technology, but they bought the people. They had to have 99% of their people come with the deal. That was part of the requirement. So take care of your people if that's your business, and don't try to be everything. You want to be focused on what you do best. Let HR people, let Insperity do HR. Let Michelle do the accounting. Those things are really worth it to me. 10 minutes? Questions? One question. Good luck.
Very specific questions. Since you do these you said you join teams in a part-time role.
Yeah.
Is that on a contract basis?
Yes.
Or is it equity?
Yeah, if I really get excited about it, I do barter some equity for the work, and some of them and it depends on the situation. So, some of them are too far along for it to be worth it. And so I get the it depends on where they are fundraising. So I like having the equity because it makes me part of the team. I work a little bit differently than Michelle. She's probably got more clients. I try to focus on a few and I become part of the management team. So I'll be going to management meetings every week, talking with the CEO, kind of become that advisor to the CEO. And having operated, I'm an operator, right? Because I did this for 10 years, 14 years as a full-time CFO. So it's a little bit, I can't totally divorce myself from the company. I just really like to be involved in the strategy setting because I just feel like I've learned so much from that experience, and that's where I add my value. Michelle's, her team just operates at a different level, and she's like really good at that projection stuff, and I do that too. I mean, everybody who's been through the experience can do any of those things, but just what do you like to do? What do I think I'm best at? I think I'm best at being that trusted advisor to the CEO. So that's what I do, and I do it on a contract basis, hourly, typically. Depends on the client. Depends on the client. So, like I have people who do the contract work like Michelle does, so they'll be, 45 to 70 depending on their experience level. So it's way cheaper than an accounting firm, what Michelle does and what I do. And the other way to go is do an accounting firm. You can, every accounting firm has a bookkeeping department. But you won't get someone to come to your place every week and sit down with you and be an advisor. It's just, I love being in startups, so that's why I do this. So it's part of my mission, I think. I'm on the board of T-Rex and was with I-10, their chairman till recently, and stepped out of that role to do some other things, start my own business this time. So this is the first time I'm now an entrepreneur, so first time in my life. So, this business, being the CFO. So I'm doing that full time and building a team of people to help work with me.
So as an entrepreneur yourself, how many clients do you think that you can have? Because you can't do without.
Yeah, I just brought on a partner. So, I think I'm at my max. So I brought on a partner to try to lift myself up to the next level and bring in some other people. So that's what you have to do, right? As a CEO, once your business gets to a certain point, you can't do it all anymore, right? So you get to a point where you say, okay, what am I really good at? What other people do I need to bring into my business? So I've decided that I grew it to this point. I can't do anymore. I'd like to raise myself up to a higher level of being, getting out of some of the detail work that I do and the projections. I can teach people. So it's, like you are, like you're going to teach someone, bring in somebody who's going to do the marketing, or bring in somebody who's going to do this, or, some things you want to own. You probably want to own your marketing because that's really expensive. and that no one can do that as well as you, who knows your customer, knows your business. Accounting, I could account for probably any business in this place. That's not business industry specific like marketing is, I think, or engineering or sales. You really have to have some knowledge of the business to be a salesperson for that product. Or, so there's some things you need to own, but there's some things you shouldn't own. And HR and accounting are probably the top on my list for things you shouldn't own. And get a really good lawyer, and use them sparingly. So that's, someone like me can help there too, because like Michelle, she's helping you review the documents. I've seen enough deals now. I know I don't always know, but I try to know what market is. Like, no, you shouldn't accept those terms, or yes, that's market. I know it sucks, but you have to accept that. So, you just kind of, and the more you see, the more you can kind of judge that stuff. So you need somebody, but a lawyer is key too, because those guys are really, they know what they're doing. You make sure you get one who knows startups though, because don't get some guy who does real estate to do this. I'm sorry, whoever the real estate guy, because they just don't know that you need someone who's done venture. That should be your first question. How many venture deals have you done? If they say, oh, this is my first, don't do it. They don't know the terms, they don't know what to accept and what not to accept, they'll waste your money. So get a really good lawyer though. I know lots of good lawyers.
Do you have any business cards
I don't. My email's on my thing. So it's JQ. So remember the Q is the queen of accounting. No. And Roberson, my last name, at Gmail. So that's kind of the one I'm
We'll
using.
get you those slides.
So
You just email.
anyway, but I always give a little free advice to anybody who asks me. It's worth what you pay for it, right? So, but I like to learn about what you guys are doing, and I meet a lot of really interesting people in this business. So, and I'm so psyched to see all you ladies out here. So let's get you funded. Let's like break those rules and say, we're going to get this whole group funded, and it's just a matter of time. So I like to see everybody out, and it's a fun business. You should make it work. So, all right.
Thank you.
Good night. Go home.